Jeff Bezos published a letter on the front page of today's Washington Post, basically saying, you know, I did this because I had noble reasons, and who are you to ask why? And, you know, quack, quack, quack. You know, I'm the rich guy, you're not, basically. We haven't heard from the billionaire publisher of the Los Angeles Times. He's not quite that high profile. We also learned that last Sunday, the richest man in America, who owes most of his wealth to President Obama bailing out his electric car company and his government contracts, endorsed a man for president who's a naked racist, fascist, and xenophobe who famously said, Donald Trump famously said, "My greedy, I grabbed all the money I could get. I'm so greedy, I want to grab all that money." Right. And then, you know, as I pointed out, the greedy billionaire owners of the Los Angeles Times and the Washington Post basically said, to hell with democracy, there's money to be made. You know, they're basically worried that Donald Trump is going to become president and go after them. I get that. You know, I'm worried that Donald Trump will become president and go after me. There's little doubt in my mind that you know, he would, if he became president. But, you know, I think I have some courage. I'm just astonished that Jeff Bezos doesn't, or Bezos, or however you say his name. But the larger question here, I think, because I'm not a billionaire, is, you know, whatever happened to the sense of obligation that wealthy Americans used to feel to help out their country and her people in need? I mean, maybe it's all the new money. Maybe it's just good old-fashioned greed. Maybe it's the nearly psychopathic drive to crush everything and everyone in your way to make your first $1 billion that twists people's perception and perspectives and their view of their fellow citizens. I don't know, whatever it is, this concept of noblesse oblige, the obligation of nobility, the obligation of great wealth to help those who are not as fortunate. It's an old French word that's now become basically an English word. It seems dead for today's conservatives among the morbidly rich. Now, it wasn't always this way. Andrew Carnegie came to this country at the age of 13 with $2 in his pocket. Within 4 decades, he was the richest man in the world. He funded 2,509 libraries. He left a massive foundation. He gave away every penny he owned, or pretty much, before he died. Joe Kennedy, you know, made a fortune during the Great Depression, during the bootlegging era. But, you know, before that, he was a bank president at 25. He was a millionaire at the age of 30. And he and his wife, Rose, pounded into their children the idea that because of their great wealth, they had an absolute obligation to serve their nation and its people, particularly those most in need. And what came out of that simple childhood instruction of noblesse oblige, was Joe Jr., who volunteered for World War II and whose plane was shot down and he died, John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Ted Kennedy, a political dynasty of people who were interested in doing good for the people who were not as wealthy as they were. Foundations were established by Henry Ford and by the Mellon family and by the John D. Rockefeller. And they've all done great good in America, you know, with the exception of Timothy Mellon, who now has disgraced his entire family by throwing millions of dollars at Donald Trump. Self-made billionaires, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, have made funding good work central to their lives by giving away most of their fortunes. But that old concept of noblesse oblige seems to have just vanished, with the exception of the two guys I just mentioned. Instead, we've got billionaires who are funding and promoting climate change denial, funding policies to give them tax cuts. Remember Donald Trump speaking to to a group of billionaires and multimillionaires saying, "You guys are rich. I'm going to give you the biggest tax cut," or words to that effect. Remember that? I mean, that was just a few months ago. Spearheading efforts to strip America of its social safety net, pushing to to destroy our public education systems. So what's causing this? I think it started with the Reagan greed is good era. You know, we had, first of all, back in the 1950s, the Foundation for Economic Education, this group that basically was a lobbying group for the real estate industry. I'm not sure if FEE was, but a lobbying group for the real estate industry invented the Libertarian Party out of whole cloth in order to have a political lobbying arm against rent control and subsidized housing. And their maxim, their theory was that if everybody operates with maximum greed, it will benefit everybody. Ayn Rand doubled down on this with her writings. You know, as John Kenneth Galbraith famously wrote, the modern conservative is engaged in one of man's oldest exercises in moral philosophy. That is, the search for a superior moral justification for selfishness. And these guys are funding think tanks to promote, you know, the billionaires' worldview and you know, worship of billionaires. We have, so there's that. I mean, there's this change in attitudes that like I said, I think you can track back to Reagan. Also, America now has the greatest income inequality in the world, in the developed world. The morbidly rich have largely separated themselves from the rest of us. They travel on private jets through private airports that don't even have security. They vacation on their massive private yachts with Supreme Court justices. They live in gated compounds with round-the-clock security and live in butlers, cooks, and nannies. They don't have to interact with us. So they live in a separate world. Another thing that may be causing so many of America's billionaires to abandon philanthropy is the globalization of wealth. Many of these people are running, you know, international companies. So they no longer feel you know, a connection to their community. And another thing that's possible is that when Reagan lowered the top tax bracket from 70% down to 25%, he eliminated the incentive to fund a foundation, to give money away, because you got tax breaks for doing that back in the day.
2 minutes.
And finally, some billionaires are now embracing what they call philanthrocapitalism. Instead of giving money to a nonprofit, they'll give money to a private school or a private prison company, saying, you know, privatizing these things is a good thing. We need a cultural shift in this country that reframes wealth not just as a privilege, but as a responsibility. Noblesse oblige. And there's a bunch of different levels at which we should do this. Number one, we should start teaching the concept of noblesse oblige, like Joe and Rose Kennedy did to their kids in elementary school. We also need social recognition of those few people, you know, like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, who have done this. They need to be applauded more. We also need to return to the tax incentives for philanthropy by returning to a top tax bracket well north of 50%. And finally, we want to encourage and reward filmmakers and television producers like, you know, Frank Capra, who's now passed away, but, you know, It's a Wonderful, it's kind of a Christmas classic. I mean, we occasionally get a taste of noblesse oblige with, like, for example, the Dark Knight series of movies, the Batman movies, where Bruce Wayne is a rich guy who you know, puts on his Batman costume to go out and help his city and the you know, the poor people in it. You know, the rich, as Jesus kind of obliquely referenced, speaking about the poor, will always be with us. But there are ways we as a society can encourage the rich to be less destructive of the public good. We should take those paths. We should be doing those things. What do you think? I see the Trump presidency, frankly, or the Trump candidacy now, as just another example of, you know, how wealth has corrupted our politics. I'll be right back. Stick around.